What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to another edition of Pistons Daily, where you can find daily content covering all things Detroit Pistons all year long. I'm your host. My name is Kyle Garrison. I'm over on Twitter at Kyle Garrison2, where I talk all things Detroit sports. So come on over, say hello, give me comments, questions, concerns, episode ideas. I'd love to hear from you guys. With that being said, let's jump right into today's video. So earlier today, Trajan Langdon had some media availability, so I just wanted to go over 4 topics that he covered, talk about what he said regarding certain things, and then I'll give my thoughts about his responses. And the first thing I wanted to go over is just overall draft strategies for the Pistons in tomorrow night's draft. And when looking at the 37th pick, there's some good options for them. What Trajan Langdon alluded to was that they're going for best player available. They're going for schematic fit. Whoever they take is going to be a guy that they know is going to benefit their young core going forward. So there's not really a specific position that they're targeting currently. He touched on forwards, wings, and guards, so pretty much a whole wide array of positions that the Pistons could be targeting, and I like that. I think it's smart to do that right now. Maybe they do have a 3 or 4 guys that they've narrowed in on, but you don't want to give other teams really any insight on your draft strategy. So I like that Trajan Langdon was pretty broad with his rundown of what they're looking at in the draft. And so they aren't really targeting anybody specifically. So guys I've talked about, Kobe Brea, Chaz Lanier, Maxime Reynaud, Alex Tuhey, Tyrese Proctor, all these guys from point guards to centers, they're all at play right now. Especially at the 37th pick where the draft gets a little bit weaker. You kind of have, you have a little bit of room for error just because at the 37th pick, it's not a ton of value. You're not sitting at 15 where you have to make a slam dunk pick right now. This guy could either be a G League player or he could give you rotational minutes in either or. I think you're happy. I will say we've talked about trading up in this draft, and Trajan Langdon alluded to the fact that moving up is going to be really pricey just because a lot of teams are going to try to jump from the early second to the end of the first round. And like I talked about, mostly because a lot of players are going back to school. A lot of players that would have been second round picks or late first rounders are going back to school to take advantage of NIL. And so there's going to be a ton of teams that are really trying to move up. So if the Pistons wanted to get into the late first round, it might cost them the 37th pick and 2 second-round picks. If you think it's worth it, then I say go for it. But, if you are comfortable with taking a guy like Chaz Lanier or Kobe Brea or some of those guys that are supposed to drop into the second round, then there's no really point in moving. I say stick where you are and try to just get the best schematic fit overall, whoever's going to come in and allow your young core to flourish and who fits the timeline overall. But yeah, so this episode will be out on Wednesday. So I will give a breakdown on Thursday's episode of whoever the Pistons end up drafting, if they do end up trading up, whether or not I think they made the right choice, and we'll go over that. But next topic I wanted to discuss is Assar Thompson. I know I talked about Assar in depth a couple episodes ago, but Trajan Langdon today, when asked about Assar, talked about how he wants to be a defensive player of the year. He doesn't just want to be a defensive all-NBA second defensive team or whatnot. He wants to be a depoy. And I agree. I think that is a very, very plausible goal for Assar. He's one of the most disruptive defenders in the entire league. And I think Trajan Langdon and JB Bickerstaff and the rest of the staff have really realized that Assar Thompson's niche and his specific skill set is when he's a defensive first player. Obviously, as he develops, you're hoping that he refines part of his offensive game and, is able to score at more than just the rim and can even find a little floater or be able to shoot in the mid-range or have a turnaround shot. I know he's been working on that spin move into the middle of the paint where he's fading away and it just wasn't working for him. But if he can develop that part of his game, I think you're really happy. I don't think he'll ever be a three-point threat. But with his defensive, MO and being able to and having just such a high motor on the defensive end of the floor, he's such a valuable piece that you'll take what you can get from him. And if he's not, a 20 point per game scorer, so be it. He can still affect the game in so many different ways. But with Wemby looming, it's going to be hard to win depoys in his career, but, I wouldn't be surprised if over the next couple of years he starts to finish near the top and ends up coming away with one. He is that type of player. I mentioned it. He's so disruptive. let's look at some metrics that do back up the fact that he's a really, really talented defender and has a lot of promise on the defensive end of the floor. The first, I'm using, what am I using here? Crafted NBA. I like to use them just to look at different metrics. They have good advanced stats. One thing that sticks out, he's in the 98th percentile in deflections at 5.1 deflections per 36 minutes last year. His rim frequency is basically the percent of opponent shot attempts at the rim where his player is able to contest the shot. Just because Assar Thompson was guarding a lot of point guards and shooting guards, that number is a little bit lower, but his versatility, which is just a measure of how versatile a player he is defensively, how many different positions he can guard, if he's able to guard in the paint and on the perimeter, and he's in the 95th percentile with 91.5 value. Obviously, it's a little bit subjective because it's just a scale of 0 to 100, but he is really, really impressive at all levels of the floor defensively. And then his crafted DPM, which is just defensive crafted plus minus, is 2.3, which is in the 97th percentile. And I mean, just all of his numbers point to the fact that he's going to be a stud on the defensive end of the floor for the rest of his career. And then also, I talked about his on-ball defense and his defense as just a singular player, but his team defense and the way he makes everybody better around him is just unbelievable. He is so disruptive off ball, and he is kind of that defensive glue that keeps this team together. And you saw last year, he allows below average defenders like Jalen Duren to look really, really solid because they can just flourish in what they're the best at. And with Jalen Duren, it's not utilizing his, side to side quickness or his lateral movements. It's staying in the paint and just being a big body there where he can take up space, and having Assar Thompson out there really allows for Jalen Duren to flourish in that role. And then some more statistics and metrics that I liked. This just points towards his effect on team defense overall, and that's MTD, which is mixed team defense. And they rank Assar Thompson based on how much he prevents the opponents from scoring as a team, as well as stopping them on an individual basis. And he's in the 93rd percentile in mixed team defense. And, obviously it was only his second year last year, and he flourished. He was unbelievable when he came back from those blood clots. And can you imagine another offseason under his belt where he can get stronger and he can get better conditioning, work on his lateral movement? It's going to be a really scary sight to see Assar Thompson out there. And I think offenses are going to have some nightmares trying to prepare and scheme for a guy like Assar Thompson, who just prides himself on being as disruptive as he possibly can. And then moving on, well, I'm sure we'll talk about more about Assar Thompson getting closer to the season, as he is one of my favorite players. But the next thing I want to talk about is Trajan Langdon alluded to the fact that this offseason they are not going to be aggressive. I talked about it the other day with Houston. The Pistons are not in a spot where they have to go all in, and Trajan Langdon seems to agree with that. When asked about the East being wide open, obviously with injuries to Damian Lillard, Jason Tatum, and Tyrese Halliburton, a lot of the top teams in the East have some vacancies at positions where they have had success in the past, or they've had production. Clearly, Jason Tatum and Tyrese Halliburton have been big parts of the Pacers and the Celtics, and those players are not going to be available next year. But Trajan really just said that they're in a good place, and the East being wide open has provoked thought, but they're just not in a place to push all their chips in. And I agree. I talked about it before. I think that there's a time when you have to go all in, and that might be after a disappointing season or whatnot. But I think last year was a great step in the right direction. You really, you made the rest of the Eastern Conference aware that you're going to be around for a while. You're not going anywhere. Cade Cunningham's going to be a force to be reckoned with in the East for years to come. So you have gained that respect. And I don't think that going and trying to force your way into a trade for a guy like Kevin Durant or, a big splash is the right answer right now. And Trajan Langdon is on the same page with that. He talked a lot about the young players and that they want to get better without having to push all their chips in, like I mentioned. He also mentioned optionality a ton. He said that word multiple times, and he continued to talk about how he doesn't want to make moves that negatively impact their young core or make moves at the expense of their young core. He wants to continue building. He wants to continue developing. And clearly he has a lot of high hopes for, guys like Ron Holland, Assar Thompson, Jaden Ivey, Marcus Sasser, just all of these young players, Jalen Duren, he has a vision where they can be a part of a championship team. So that's why I think he talked about how he's going to be a little bit less aggressive than what people might have thought. And I agree. I don't mind it at all. I think you have to build your young core. It's very important. We've seen all these teams that have had success over the past 5 years or so with so much parity in the NBA that it can be any team's year as long as they have the right pieces and are developing from within instead of going out and trying to blow it up and bring in a super team like the Nets in years past or the Suns a couple of years ago, but rather develop their young core, surround them with veteran pieces like the Tim Hardaway Jr.'s and Malik Beasley's and Tobias Harris's, and figure out a way to allow your young core to mesh and get more comfortable together from year to year, because it's a lot easier to grow together than, growing individually and trying to work together or trying to find ways to work together, compared to just having the right team chemistry and knowing your personnel and being together for multiple years in a row. So I like Trajan Langdon's outlook on that. I think it's smart. I know a lot of Pistons fans are going to be a little bit hesitant to agree with Trajan because they do want to make a big splash, but at the end of the day, it's not necessary right now. A couple of moves here and there, I think you have to make some upgrades, but I don't think it has to be something where you're giving up a ton of future assets or you're having to sign somebody to a massive deal. I think there's a lot more potential with this team if you are to build within. So moving on, obviously, we're going to talk about this young core so much this year and going forward. So I'll try and stick to more offseason talk in later videos. But because Trajan Langdon had a press conference today, I just wanted to touch on things that he discussed. And the last thing he did talk about was that Jaden Ivey and Isaiah Stewart are making great progress and that they will both be back healthy next season, which is really, really encouraging. Obviously, we know what Jaden Ivey brought last year and what Isaiah Stewart brought last year on the defensive end before he got injured before the playoffs. But I know a lot of the offseason talk where fans want to make a big splash surrounds around the fact that you didn't have Isaiah Stewart last year and you didn't have Jaden Ivey last year, and it looked a little rough at times. Having Paul Reed get minutes was really rough, but if you look back to the regular season, the Isaiah Stewart bench minutes were phenomenal. He played excellently. Jaden Ivey was unbelievable when he was playing, and you didn't have those players in the Eastern Conference playoffs or in the first round of the playoffs against the Knicks, and it showed. It really did. So I understand that it's frustrating, but if you think about what this team might have looked like with those two guys healthy, it's a lot different. And at the end of the day, I think Jaden Ivey, when he comes back, he could be that second option that everybody wants. If he becomes more efficient at the rim and starts to become a 20-point per game off-ball scorer that shoots 48% from the field, 38% from three, and 85% from the line, you're very, very happy with that in year 4 of Jaden Ivey, especially considering if he can play off ball, you have your backcourt of the future with Cade Cunningham, and all of the talks of going out and making a big splash this offseason kind of get put to rest because Jaden Ivey can become that guy. And if he does reach that ceiling, I think that Pistons fans will kind of backtrack and be like, well, yeah, you're right. Maybe we didn't have to make a splash. But if Jaden Ivey comes back and he's a shell of his former self, then maybe they did make a mistake this offseason. It's only going to be a matter of time. But personally, I do think Jaden Ivey's going to come back better than ever and be really, really solid next year. Maybe not a 40% three-point shooter, but anywhere from 37, 38, I wouldn't be surprised. And then with Isaiah Stewart, obviously we talked about him. It's going to be interesting to see what his role on the team is next year. If you add a guy like Jake LaRavia or PJ Washington, people I've talked about on the podcast in past episodes, that would really help Isaiah Stewart. I think Simone Fontecchio and Isaiah Stewart can't be your bench front court, but if you were to add a guy that can space the floor better than Simone Fontecchio, that would untap Isaiah Stewart as a defender, and I just think it's just going to be beneficial to the team overall, and Trajan Langdon has that same viewpoint as well. But overall, getting these two guys back is going to make a world of difference. And if the Pistons do have an underwhelming offseason in terms of acquisitions, it's because they believe in this young core and that these guys can lead them to contention. That's all I've got for today. If you haven't already, please like, subscribe, comment, turn on post notifications, and follow me on Twitter at Kyle Garrison2 for more content covering all things Detroit sports. Let me know down below or over on Twitter if you think that Assar Thompson has the ability to be a Defensive Player of the Year candidate for years to come. Also, Also, let me hear your thoughts on Trajan Langdon's press conference, and if you think the Pistons are in a spot where they don't need to be extra aggressive this offseason. With that being said, thanks so much for tuning in. That's going to do it here for episode 7 of Pistons Daily, and I will catch you all next time.